Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. Today, I speak with Professor Michael Cardew-Hall, who currently is the Pro Vice-Chancellor of Innovation at the Australian National University. Michael leads strategic initiatives to build growth in research and education through partnerships with industry, government, and not-for-profit organisations. He was previously CEO of ANU Connect Ventures, a pre-seed venture capital fund associated with the ANU, and holds a seat on the ANU Connect Ventures Investment Committee. He also has held the positions of Head of Department of Engineering, Deputy Dean, and Acting Dean of the College of Engineering and Computer Science at the ANU. Professor Cardew-Hall is also a Chartered Engineer and a Fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and the Institution of Engineers Australia. He's also held technical and management positions with GEC and Rolls-Royce Aero Engines in the UK prior to joining the ANU back in 1993. He has been an active researcher in the area of CAD, computer-aided manufacture, application of machine learning and knowledge-based systems to manufacturing, and the optimisation of manufacturing processes, particularly in sheet metal forming. He joins me in the studio. Professor Cardew-Hall, thanks very much for joining me on GovComms.
You're welcome.
You've been busy.
It's been a long career.
How are things? And I think probably context is always a great place to start. You have a big job there in terms of, the innovation role, the Pro Vice-Chancellor of Innovation at the ANU. But perhaps before we get to that, education as a sector globally has really copped it, hasn't it, as part of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can talk about ANU in a minute, but what's your helicopter view on the future of higher education globally as a result of the pandemic?
Well, that's the crystal ball that we'd all like to know the answer to. It has had a significant impact. There's no question of that. If you look all over the world, it's the mobility of international students that has really sort of supported, particularly in Australia, supported a lot of our growth in our higher education sector here, and that has also then allowed the universities to fund a lot of research from that income as well, and that has just been put on hold. So it is very, very challenging. I think what this will do is that it will make Australian higher education much more competitive. What I mean by that is that if we look to see where those students may go to as the borders open up, there's a good chance they could go over to Europe, UK, Canada, the US, and I think our competitiveness in those markets for those international students is going to be challenged over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. So they'll be more likely to go to the UK or to the US or to Canada rather than come to Australia?
So, no, I think that there's always a demand for Australia, and Australia has a high quality and a high profile, in particularly in Asia, Southeast and Northeast Asia. So there'll always be a demand there, but it's a case of they will go where they feel as though they can actually, A, they're welcomed, and B, where they can get in. So earlier in the week we saw that Canada opened up its borders in October to international students. Right. If they're finishing their studies now in China or anywhere else in Asia, they will go to Canada because they can go there. And they're not going to put their education on hold. So once then you get a sort of a stream of students going there who then, when they graduate, tell other students what an experience they've had, it sets up. So, that's what we've benefited from in Australia. People have seen it as a safe place, high quality education, lots of opportunity here. If people don't come here, the word of mouth won't get back, and that's our biggest challenge.
And so how then does the university adapt itself? Because it's not as if you can say, oh, all right, okay, well, we'll just go down this path, because it's not that easy just to turn one line of growth and revenue and turn another one on almost immediately. No,
it's very hard, and particularly in education where students are coming in for a number of years. There's a fairly long time constant to it. So I think there is we've been looking at how we can offer more and more of our courses and programs online. And so that has been something that we've really invested in and accelerated as others have. I think that will see us do that rather than the exception, it become more part and parcel of what we do all the time. So I think that will be a significant stepping stone. I think also what we'll see is that we, at the ANU in particular, we sort of focused in and we accepted that we were going to have less students anyway. That's part of our strategy. But what is it you can offer which is of a uniqueness, so that what is on the on-campus component and what can be done off-campus, particularly at the master's level. And I think we'll see an evolution of delivery modes and blended delivery modes, which are not about all coming on campus. There will be a sort of a mixture of how you mix that up. And we might even look at how we might offer components offshore in different places. Many universities do that. In Australia, we've never done that. We may do that. There's a cost associated, but I think it's blended delivery. What's the mode, and then what's the experience which is unique that you can offer that others aren't offering.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Even the competitive context for higher education, because I read with interest the other day that Google is now offering certifications, and when you start to see the big platforms starting to come into higher education in a big way, that must sort of send a shiver down your spine that, there's another competitor coming onto the landscape and offering, high quality certification at an absolute bargain basement price.
Indeed, and the reality is you probably can't go head to head on direct offerings. This is why we've got what is the role of the university? What is the experience that we're offering that you can have? And so you've got to differentiate yourself from those new entrants into the sector. And it's going to be around, for us, it'll be, I think that'll be more at the sort of sub-undergraduate. We talk a lot about micro-credentials now. I think Google, you will certainly have an edge in some of that area, but it's how do you actually then articulate up into accredited degree programs. Now, that's sort of an edge that we have at the moment. But then what is the experience? What does the student want? Does the student just want to get content and get an accredited course, or do they want an experience where they can come to a campus or an institution and actually spend time with leaders in their field? Now, one might say in certain areas Google can do that, but in other areas the universities are still the bastion of where you find the experts in a whole range of areas which are more in that humanities and social sciences as well as the sciences and other areas.
So this podcast obviously focuses on communication in all its forms, be it internal communication, external communication, storytelling, such that business objectives can be achieved. It's interesting, isn't it, when you're in a position where you're in such flux, where it's not settled to exactly what it is your story is going to be, it makes it a little bit hard to go to the market with a story when the story's not actually set up yet. So as you're saying, there's a lot of considerations that you've got to land on before you can then start to tell that story. So what's that process then of trying to move through the development of that story such that you can get into the marketplace as quickly as possible to start to position yourselves as, this is the ANU offering?
So it's interesting that you sort of frame it in that terminology. We have had a project called the ANU Story, which we started at the beginning of the year, prior to all this. But it was specifically to actually, what is the narrative we want to project out, not just around for our undergraduates and our postgraduate students, but also more generally for the community around what the ANU is about. So that is an active project that's been ongoing. It comes down to, what is our history, what is our role within the nation, and this is where we take our role as being the national university very seriously. And that sort of starts as the bedrock of what at the start of our narrative is. And then we're sort of building upon that, and then building upon, the role that we have for Australian society and the Australian economy overall. And then we play into that, what is it that the students that come in, what are the modes by which what are the experiences they're going to have on campus? So we focus very much now on also the student experience they may have, and which is why we spent so much time and effort building lots of accommodation on campus.
And it's a beautiful beautiful campus now, isn't it? You know, not only are the beautiful trees and the rolling areas and all the rest of it, but now you've got those modern facilities there, which are just fantastic.
Yeah. we were sorely in need of new facilities.
Yes, that's true.
And there has been a once-in-a-generation investment in a whole range of the new Canterbury precinct in the centre for the students, new halls of residence. You know, they've got the Bruce Wright Hall complex. You know, it's basically regenerated the whole of the campus, but also by putting so many students on campus, you create a vibrant life on campus, which is fairly unique. You get it in the US and in the UK, you get that vibrancy on campus. It's less common in Australia, and we're just fortunate we've got a lovely campus and we've managed to develop it well.
But when do you think it may fill up again? You know, have you got any idea at all? Could you say, you know, it's going to be 5 years, it's going to be 3 years, it's going to be 10 years?
Impossible. Who knows?
Yeah.
It really depends. We believe as soon as the borders are open, the rate of return will be probably higher than we anticipate. Yeah. But that's all finger in the air stuff at the moment.
So in terms of just returning to that narrative, the story of the Australian National University, just how important is it that it is the Australian National University, and it really is the federal government's university in many ways? Correct,
yeah. Now, we're the only university that's actually under federal government Commonwealth Act. All the others are under state acts. So we are, the Commonwealth's university, and we have a special relationship. And I think it is important. It was established as a research-only institution. So we had no undergraduates until 1960. And that frames what the institution was about. It's about doing research in areas that help the government evolve and do post-war reconstruction, effectively. And so we still take that very seriously. When Brian Schmidt became Vice-Chancellor and we put our strategic plan together under him, we very much focused on we are the National University. What does it mean to be the National University, and what is our role as a National University? And that is part of the strategic plan. And we're going and revisiting that now, but it's about, what is our special relationship with the federal government? How do we get better at engaging with the agent, whether it's the government itself in the Minister's office or the public service? And so we're working with lots of agencies now about how do we actually, work more closely around what their needs are and how we can influence that, whether it's at the policy level or even much more at the basic, providing the sort of skills that they need for the APS going forward.
So really it's interesting, isn't it? You talk about that post-war reconstruction period, but now it's the post-COVID reconstruction period. So the ANU will obviously play a critical role in being able to work with the federal government to help Australia to recover.
That is certainly our aspiration, yeah. And certainly it's something that Brian works very hard at, working with whether it's the Education Minister or any of the ministers or the Prime Minister to try and articulate what that might do. Might be.
So just back to that narrative piece, what do you then do when COVID-19 comes along and you're developing your story and it's all falling nice and all of a sudden a once-in-a-generation pandemic sideswipes your narrative? What do those discussions look like internally in terms of, okay, we've got to keep moving through this, we've got to keep communicating, we've got to, keep engaging with stakeholders, we've got to keep people letting know, we've got bad news that we've got to get out there. Like it's a complex task, isn't it?
It is. Look, it's like we're not alone. There are many organisations that are looking at us, but it has been very, very challenging. It doesn't help when, first of all, we focused in on, if I step through chronologically, it came in, the first thing is a lot of our students international students couldn't come back. So we've always focused on trying to provide the best experience we can for the students, because that then maintains a commitment to the student and the student experience. Whether it's they're still up, back in their home countries or they're stuck in Melbourne. We've got a lot of students stuck down in Victoria who haven't been able to come back either. So they're in the same boat. You don't have to be overseas to be sort of suffering as a student in this environment. So that has always been a sort of a core. How do we maintain safety for our students? We were doubly hit because we sort of had our first crisis when we had I don't remember, the hailstorm came through.
Yes, it destroyed a lot of the glass houses and
it destroyed building. It destroyed University House. University House hasn't been open since then.
Actually, that's true.
And it won't be open until the end of next year. or even 2022.
Oh, really?
But, yeah, it's a heritage building, so
Yeah.
it's going to require a lot of restoration. So we had, we shut the, and then after that it's then what is the best thing for our staff? So we went fairly hard and we shut the campus down. So we just worked through the standard things that you might do in a crisis management. We do have a very good, well-defined crisis management program.
Yep.
It's not the first time the university has been hit by fires and storms and other things. So we just worked our way through that. This one's just gone on a bit longer. And obviously the knock-on effects from a financial perspective are going to take a bit longer to get through.
What have you learnt, though, about storytelling through this crisis period? What is it that you have to do to be successful?
I think we always, and the Vice-Chancellor has always maintained, first of all, you have to be as transparent and open as you possibly can. There's no point in not being transparent and open. But within the content of being, factually correct when you go out and be open and transparent. And so it's working through getting those messages out to the community broadly as frequently as you can in a practical way. And I think that's been the key thing, is that we've always tried to communicate. We've always tried to then keep two-way communication. We've always tried to listen to what the community is saying. And I think that's the biggest... I would say it's the biggest learning, it's the biggest thing we put in place that we knew we had to.
Did you have any gaps in capability, given that there's been such an acceleration to online communication, digital communication? Were you ready for COVID-19?
No. The biggest thing is that we had to flip everything. That we had to flip all the coursework into online. No, you're just not ready for that.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you were planning for it, the investment you'd have to make will be huge. But what we did is we had an unbelievably talented workforce of academics who really just moved hell and high water to basically shift everything from basically face-to-face delivery to online delivery.
And it's not as if there's a manual, I suppose, that someone can say, hey, this is how you turn your course into, an effective online.
We do have some small groups of education advisors who help with that. So there is a sort of a profession in its own right.
Yeah, right.
We don't have it. We didn't have a huge investment in it. We've grown that to a degree. But it is a skill set. How do you actually take what you normally do face to face and then actually put it in a way that's meaningful? And it takes a long time. 1 hour's content delivery face to face. You've got to spend best part of a week doing 1 hour to get it online, and that's a huge task.
Yeah. So one of the other responsibilities, one of the big responsibilities you have is around innovation and connecting up the university and its capability into the business sector, not just into government, because really the business sector is really where a lot of that innovation collaboration takes place as well. How do you go about telling the story of the ANU into the business community so they can access and work with you and work with the great minds and innovation that is actually sitting inside the university? How do you sort of make that work?
So I see it. There's two ways of interacting with the university and the intellectual horsepower that's in the university. You can either take the intellectual property and commercialise it and take it out, and that's one way that you have to engage. Yep. Or the other way is to go out and say, we've got this capability, what's your problem? Yep. And then match up the two, and then you actually get sort of either funded research or funded projects coming the other way. The whole, historically, the whole innovation area and doing this effectively business development is a contact sport. It's you get out there and you just meet people and you network and you try whatever angles you can. Crudely, it's no different to selling. And so you just have to build that profile. So it's about building the networks. So that's at the fundamental level. So you need people. So then you need people that actually can bridge between the culture, which is the university culture, and the culture, which is the business culture, which are very, very different. The drivers are very different. So you have to get the right people to bridge those that can actually then do the contact inside and the contact outside and try and build those bridges. So that's the norm. And so that can require then getting out and essentially, if you've got a piece of IP or a piece of intellectual property or expertise you're trying to find, you then you go around and try and find who might be interested in that. By the same token, we do get approached. The one thing that we do have going for us is that The ANU has got a terrific brand.
Yep.
Once you say you're from the ANU, and you go into a business or industry, and you say I'm from the ANU, they actually getting open doors is not hard.
Yeah.
It's then actually making sure that you understand what the issues that partner may want, and actually bringing it back in and actually making sure that we have the capability and the desire on the part of the academic to actually want to work with them. Once you get that matched, it can just, it'll take off. The other area that we've probably been a bit slower on, but we probably are ramping up more and more, is around the whole social media.
Yep.
Obviously, there are some key channels to that. And with other businesses, LinkedIn is one of the big ones that we would try and exploit as much as we can. So that's something that we're building up more and more, and the same as any other business.
It must be challenging though. Like the ANU is a sprawling sort of enterprise, isn't it? In many ways, you have all of the different colleges and schools and all the rest of it. How do you get all of the good ideas? Because I'm sure there are, they're in all sorts of nooks and crannies and different places. It must be. Have you got a system where you sort of sweep through saying, hey, who's got a good idea that we can take to the world, or...?
No, so there are different mechanisms. The university, like all good universities around the world, is fairly devolved. And you're right, is that it's all little pockets and, little self-determining groups. So anything coming hierarchical it's very difficult to do. The way that you can do it is often we will either go out and actually get people wandering around just to see if there's any opportunities, or the other things we might do is we might say, okay, here's a challenge. A number of years ago we introduced the Grand Challenge program, and we asked people, okay, so you articulate what you think the challenge for Australia is, and then you put forward a project which we might fund it, and that can actually. Money always teases people out the woodwork in a university. So you put a bit of money on the table and out it comes. But it's yielded some really, really interesting capabilities. And what you do is you make it a criteria. It can't be just from one area. You've got to say, you've got to team up with, say, one or two other areas in order to put together your combined capabilities. So we've now got our philosophers working with our computer scientists on our human-machine interface. Yeah. And it's looking at the ethics of machine learning applications. And so that's been pretty exciting. Another one is out of our psychology areas looking at social cohesion. Yeah. So it can tease out all sorts of things. Another big one we've got is referred to as the Zero Carbon Australia, which is really about how do we actually start to produce energy at zero carbon, or even negative carbon, i.e., you reduce the carbon amount by it, and it's then we link that up with our expertise around Northern Australia, because often we want to try and do so. We're trying to match up our HAS part of our university with our STEM part of the university, and just that then attracts other partners. One that we announced last week was with Optus, a strategic partnership with Optus around bushfires. A grand challenge. They're very interested, and we've got our bushfire centre, and so it's now how do we build out the technology part of that, but also match up with our Fenner School of the Environment to what the environmental impacts might be as well. And it becomes multidimensional very, very quickly.
So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned the changing nature of overseas students, and understand that, borders and all the rest of it. Then the sort of evolving nature with the federal government, and how does that work? What changes with industry post-COVID? How does that relationship change with the university? This
has been a continuous challenge for the last 30 or 40 years. So how do you get a better interface between the universities and the business and industry, so you can accelerate the recovery that we require? And, every government I've ever known since I've been here in Australia has had this as a desire. For me, it comes down to, first of all, is that there's got to be a desire on both parts, and an understanding of the cultural drivers in both organisations. Yeah. If you don't understand that, you'll always miss each other. Yeah. If you can get an alignment around those common areas of overlap and an understanding of what drives both sides, you'll end up with something that might be very successful in driving forward something that's mutually beneficial. There are various programs around which the government have which help with that through the Australian Research Council and the Cooperative Research Centre program, and there's a number of them that help. But I think there's the biggest thing that you have to, with the universities should be able to provide. There's a concept called innovative capacity, and the best firms, the best businesses, have some kind of capacity to absorb even innovation. And what we find in Australia, what I've observed in Australia, is a lot of companies are of a size or a mindset that they are run incredibly well but incredibly lean, and their ability to innovate is very, very limited. Yeah. So it's how do you actually perhaps take some of the capacity that's in universities and put them into, work with businesses to allow them to absorb this innovative capacity. It's the one thing I think that differentiates Australian business from businesses internationally, particularly in Europe and the US and Japan.
It's interesting what you've outlined there, because on another podcast that I run, and it's called Work with Purpose, and it's about the federal government's, or the APS, the Australian Public Services, the response to COVID. And one of the regular features of that podcast are all of the stories that you hear about the collaboration and the partnership between government and business in responding to the crisis. It happened. They actually, it was a real thing in terms of supply chains and food in supply chains and all those other things. How do we then, and again, I think there's a role almost, as you're outlining, for the universities to sort of sit inside that collaborative, cooperative ecosystem that will help Australia to come out of the challenge. And obviously it's not just a model in Australia, it could be a model for everywhere. So clearly there's going to be a key role for the universities, isn't there, to sort of, be a contributor and a driver, not just with government, but joined up to business, leveraging the best of the university in order to, create progress. Yeah,
and it's about how we... and you sort of alluded to, in a crisis, we've done so much. The innovations that have occurred since the beginning of the year are huge. And it's the same thing if you historically look at during wartime, the rate of innovation during wartime, because it's, an existential crisis. So, but you can't live in an existential crisis all the time. You get exhausted. So the question is, how can you actually embed what you've done during those periods in a more structural way? And I think it'd be interesting to see whether you could actually embed elements of the university inside whether it's a government department or whether it's a company. And there have been various other schemes overseas that have tried to do this, some successfully, but it's about how do you actually provide those places, and so you get this sort of this crossover of ideas and cultures, but very focused around some outputs that you're trying to achieve.
Some problems that need to be solved. And actually, you just given me an idea. So when the microphones stop, I might actually have a quick chat with you about that. No, because I was in a conversation in a government department this morning where that might come together, again, to deliver a benefit, because I actually can see that could work really quite well, again. But I like your point about the fact that, you've got to understand where people are coming from. If you're at cross purposes, well, you can forget it. But I think in crisis, people have actually very quickly levelled up to where people need to understand. But just as a final question then, how do you sustain it? How do you keep it going? Because I know at senior levels in the APS, there's so much in the Australian Public Service, there has been a lot of change, but how do you hold on to that? How do you stop the beast returning back to the way that it's always wanted to work?
Look, I think if you had the answer to that, overall, you'd be a very rich man. So you obviously you've got to try and systemize as much as you can. Yeah. But it's always, for me, it's about culture and values. And so if you can get the right culture based upon the right set of values that are agreed, and you just keep reinforcing those cultures and values, then, because what happens is that it's the cultures and values of the parent organisation that just often creep in over time, and so if you've got a dynamic team that has got that, it's just keeping that. I think also what it is in any organisation, it requires that sort of push up from the bottom and also an oversight from the top. Yeah. And so making sure that the appropriate levels of senior leadership and through the organisation accept and really support what's trying to be achieved in those innovative little groupings.
But when those behaviours start to rear their heads again, the old behaviours, the behaviours that you want to leave behind, that they've really got to be jumped on pretty severely and said, no, that's not what we're doing. Because again, I think post-COVID, there's resources are going to be tight, so we're going to have to be massively innovative in the way that we work together to get the best out of it. And I'm very optimistic, actually, about how these things can come together, because I do think there's appropriate resources, but it is mindset. It is really cultural, and I think that's a good point that you raised there about that. So, As I say, don't go anywhere. I'm going to talk to you in a minute, but I'm going to close out the program. Professor Michael Cardew-Hall, thanks for coming in to GovComms. Yes, I'm just trying to work out which podcast I'm doing today. But GovComms is this very, very popular podcast about government communications. And interesting there to talk to Professor Cardew-Hall about the challenges of universities connecting with audiences and connecting with their people and keeping people connected to their work during such a difficult period of time. And looking at this changing environment, and really what sets, the atomic particle in all of this is communication. And if we can get that bit right, if we can get the understanding right, you'll get the progress, you'll get the innovation, and you'll get ultimately the impact and the benefit, which is ultimately what this is all about. Now, the other big news, as you know, is that we are hosting the GovComms Festival. It's part of the OECD's Government Aftershock Global Dialogue, and I will turn off my phone. After the OECD's Government Aftershock Global Dialogue. It is on November the 17th. It is going to be a 24-hour event. We are starting in Canberra and we are following the sun. We are going around the world and we are going to listen to people from all around the world. We're going to learn from people all around the world about what is happening in government communication, and hopefully we'll pick up lots of insights, or you, the listener, will pick up lots of insights. Lots of great speakers being confirmed as we speak, a lot of great partnerships being confirmed as we speak, and we will have more to announce over the coming weeks. So jump on to, just Google GovComms Festival, jump on, register. If you would like to make an expression of interest or a contribution, please make sure you do that. It's a co-created schedule at the moment, so certainly any contributions that you have would be gratefully accepted. So looking forward to making some big announcements in the coming weeks. We are 41 days or maybe 40 days away from the launch of that particular festival, which is something that I'm very much looking forward to, and I know you are too. But thanks for coming back for the program again this week. We'll be back at the same time next week, but for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.